Hollywood, this is Jess Graham Live. I'm Jay the Stingray. And here's Jess.
Thank you for that lovely intro, Jay. Welcome. And welcome our guest, Lorne Dixon. Thank you for coming.
I didn't go anywhere.
Hey-o.
Oh.
No, it's great to be here. Jess, I think your channel has exactly the recipe, really. It has its own personality. You go and discuss the things that appeal to you, which is what we really all should be doing. Like, we should stop chasing any kind of algorithm. Just be who you are. And I think you've embraced that on such a fundamental level. It's just, you're doing it right, man. 100%.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much. That's a high compliment. Thank you. Thank you so much. And let's just say hi to people who had showed up. We got our friend Daniel Shine. Dr. CZ Death. Welcome. Excuse the actual comments. I just realized what I was pulling up.
That's okay.
And Mike said hello earlier. All right. Well, let's get right into it. Oh, Blu-rays. Thanks for saying hi. Well, we'll get right into it. You've probably seen the show, and if you haven't, well, I get right into the questioning, and we start from the beginning. And I'm going to go with, checking my notes. We got our new co-host, Mr. Jay the Stingray, as you all know. It's his first show, too, as a co-host, announcer. All right, my first question to Lorne. Your mini bio states that you grew up on a diet of yellow spine paperbacks, black and white monster movies, and the Thunder Lizard backbeat of rock and roll. These are obviously things that inspired you to become a writer. Do you remember the moment you knew exactly that you wanted to be a writer?
So I don't know about a moment. I grew up very rural in New Jersey, and I didn't have a lot of kids in the neighborhood that I could just run out the door and meet and play with. We had an extra neighbor, but they weren't always around. So a lot of time was spent between my sister and I playing games, whether they were board games or imagination-based games. I mean, my sister was my closest friend for many, many years, out of necessity and just because she's pretty awesome. So one day she decided she picked up a couple books, and she was just getting into that. She's a couple years older than I. And she got into the idea of the game was we were going to write a story. And I think I wrote 2 lines. I went nowhere. It was awful. It was probably subliterate. But she wrote this little self-contained story about a girl walking home from a party and hearing footsteps behind her. But every time she turned, she couldn't see anyone, and the footsteps would stop. Now, I'm sure she cribbed it from someone, right? Because, I don't know, she was probably 11 or something. But the sheer act of creation that I saw just was like intoxicating. The idea that you could create something that didn't exist before, and all you needed was a pen and an empty piece of paper. It sounds stupid in probably the internet generation, but it was unbelievable to me. It was amazing. And it would be years and years before I really seriously considered writing as a thing I could do. But that was a formative experience that really stuck with me. And that's kind of the experience I credit with wanting to be a writer.
Excellent. That is great. That's a better story than I even expected from you. It's fantastic. And before I forget, there is a question from our good friend Corey Ross from this channel, because he has to go to bed even earlier than we do. So I want to get that question out before I totally forget it. This is from Corey Ross. Given the creation of the worlds you create and the people that inhabit those worlds, would you say that writing is the closest thing to being God a man can get to?
I think you're giving way too many writers way too much credit. I've always looked at it as just a puzzle that you create yourself. It's interesting to me to create a problem to solve for myself and then see if I can do it. So, I mean, I don't think that's godly. I think that's just kind of the regular curiosity about what someone's capable of. So, for instance, Blue Eel is a novel that has a story, it has a narrative. But the key thing for me was that I wanted to never play the hand of from a narrative standpoint about what is objectively true. So that book, the reader spends the entire book really deciding what they think happened on this one night that's never on screen in the book. And that's an interesting puzzle. Like, how do you write a book about an event without ever describing the event? So for me, it's not about being God or controlling a situation. It's trying to figure out how to do these like literary puzzles and make them make sense and maybe move the needle, right? Because why do anything unless you're actually creating something that hasn't been done before? So that's what I'd say. I don't know. I don't want to be God. I don't believe in gods. I don't respect gods. I don't want to be one.
I don't think I'd want to be God either. Daniel Shine says, freaking Jay taunting Lorne with that full head of hair. Slap him with the blue eel, Lorne.
Yeah, he's definitely got that kind of Buddy Holly pompadour going tonight. So
he does. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need a
no, it's glorious. Don't do anything about that.
Jamie, thanks for dropping by. And Mike, definitely going to bed now. Just needed to see Lorne's beautiful face, of course. And Dan's got to get his Lorne fix.
I suggest, Mike, you need to visit that your eyewear professional and probably upgrade whatever is hanging off your face right now, because there's nothing beautiful right here.
Oh, there is. There is. Don't be so humble. Okay. My next question. What was your first published work?
Oh, it's actually untitled, but it was a piece of what would be called now a flash fiction, I guess. A couple hundred words. It appeared in a magazine called Lime Green Bulldozers out of Texas. I submitted it, and they bought it. It was really more of like a punk zine that just ran poetry and very short fiction. It's not very good. It's not even close to good, actually. But I remember, and by the way, this is a zine. You know, this was like something photocopied and stapled and sent out to maybe 200 people across the country who listened to bands like, Corrosion of Conformity. And because it was part of that scene, right? And I was part of that scene at that time. But that was the first time like someone had actually said, "Yeah, we'll put your words down and we'll spread it to other people." And that was a big moment. But then a couple years later, I actually sold a real like legitimate short story to White Knuckles magazine, which was a small press magazine run by the great John Platt, who, if anyone knows who that is, he was a very important member of the Horror Writers of America. John Platt also was president of the Garden State Horror Writers at one point. And that story was called White Knuckles. That story in White Knuckles was called Blueberries. And again, not very good. Not something that's going to ever reappear anywhere. But the reality is, again, it was like I wrote something, I created something, and other people saw it. And I was still a teenager there, just basically hanging on to being a teenager. I think I was 19 when those pieces appeared. And just important formative moments, not something I put on a resume.
But a good feeling. Still an important moment, for sure.
Well, it's kind of like, I don't think that like the great actors of a generation, I don't think your Denzel Washingtons or your Gary Oldmans would look back at their high school productions and say, "Oh, you need to see my work," start here. But by the same rate, like at the time, yeah, I mean, I was shaking when I opened the envelope and pulled that copy of Lime Green Bulldozers out of that envelope. I was shaking, I still have all the early fanzines and, small press magazines that I appeared in. It's just one of those things that it makes an impact on you that you were able to create something and share it with the world. And, maybe there's 2 people on the planet that remember the story from when they read it back then. But that's 2 people. It means something.
It's worth it. Definitely. What that brings us to, you've had now in your lifetime a number of short stories published in magazines, books, with other short story collections, and I'm sure much more that I guess you'd be proud of and are still available.
Yeah.
What are some of those most notable ones to you?
Well, I sold 5 short stories to the Horror Library anthology series, which Cutting Block Press at the time, they later would be Cutting Block Books after a change of ownership. They were basically publishing a yearbook of who's who in horror at that moment, and I managed to sell 5 stories to them over the course of 7 years, 2 of which ended up appearing in the same anthology. I was the only writer to have done that during the line's history, whereas there was 2 stories from the same person. And most of those stories are available in the First Visited by Voices collection, simply because they were kind of the there you go. They were kind of the place where people started to really notice, hey, this is a guy who's doing work. There was also a collection called Darkness on the Edge, edited by Harrison Howe, which was a pretty big deal for me too, because even though in the Horror Library anthology series I appeared with people like Jeff Strand and Gary Bronbeck, that book is just an unbelievable lineup of like just the top names in horror, and then me, which is preposterous. It's insane.
It's awesome.
Hardcover from the UK from PS Press, which is a very, very well regarded. It's a publisher of I don't know, premium horror, and that was the concept of that anthology was short stories that were inspired by the works of Bruce Springsteen. So of course the Jersey connection helped me. I also chose a story, a song that was not exactly one of the big top hits. So I think it appealed to the idea that someone was not just trying to do Darkness on the Edge of Town or, Hungry Heart, which are a little bit more obvious. No offense, Jeff Strand, for doing Hungry Heart. But that was a great experience. That opened up a lot of doors for me too, because when you're appearing with literally the biggest names in horror publishing, besides Stephen King, obviously, I've never appeared in print with King, but I've appeared with so many of my heroes, including people that now, because of my show, I'm proud to say are closer to that. There's some friends that have grown out, and it's kind of cool just to point back and say, hey, look, we were both in this thing like 20 years ago or whatever it is now. It's almost 20 years, I think.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, there's a question or two in the chat. I got Daniel Shine wants you. Oh, not that one. Good. Tell us about how you first discovered Lovecraft.
So back in the day, there was horror fiction magazines that were like wide circulation, whereas you could pick up a magazine and actually read horror short stories at any newsstand. They were popular enough for that. And a big one for me was Twilight Zone magazine, which started in the 70s and died in the late 80s. And Twilight Zone was you could read original Robert Bloch stories, you could read Richard Matheson stories. So it was the big names. And one name that kept coming up in every interview, because they'd run interviews as well as the stories, everyone was talking about H.P. Lovecraft. And this is before Stuart Gordon made Lovecraft into kind of a pop culture phenomenon for an entire generation. So it was more like, who is this guy that these people keep talking about? You'd walk into your Walden books, and there was no Lovecraft on the shelf. Everything was out of print. So it was one of those things that, like, I was searching anytime there was a used book event that I could go to, anything. And then one day, Tor Books published all of Lovecraft in paperbacks and put them out to bookstores. This is, I think, 85 or 86. And I had money to buy one book that day. And suddenly I'm staring at 6 Lovecraft titles, not knowing what I should go with. And the book I bought was The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath and Other Stories, which is actually a fantasy anthology, not a horror anthology, but it's a Lovecraftian fantasy anthology, including a short novel called Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. And I picked it up and I read it, and I was transfixed by just the sheer use of language and what it was teasing out of me. So I didn't start with like Call of Cthulhu or Dagon or A Shadow over Innsmouth or all the stuff that everyone tends to have the first experience with, but it was only sheer accident. I didn't know which book to buy, so I bought the one pretty much at random. with the strangest title. I think that probably was it, the strangest title, you know. But then I read all of Lovecraft. Like every week I went back when I had enough money and I bought another one of them until I had all of them. And I'd read them all, and then I reread them all, and I would bring them to school and in study hall because I was failing classes, so I didn't have free time. I had study hall. I read Lovecraft, and that was my early, you know, between the end of grammar school and into high school. I probably reread Lovecraft 6 times over. I mean, I was obsessive about it. I was reading other stuff too, and you know, things like Clive Barker were just starting to bubble up then. The books of blood were coming out, so I was definitely reading all that. But yeah, Lovecraft is a big influence on me, and I kind of do get annoyed that people just want to talk about some of his failings as a person of a certain age in a certain time, rather than talk about the work, because the work is just amazing and deserves to be held up on a pedestal, no matter what the failings are of the man who created it.
Good answer. Jonathan, hello. Well, let's get back with Lorne's work. What was your first published novel? Was it Snarl? It was Snarl. Okay. I mean, I get a little confused. Is that part of a trilogy? Sort of.
So it was an intended series.
Okay.
What would have well, we'll get to it in a second.
Okay.
So Snarl, 2009, sold in 2008, comes out in 2009. It was not something I intended to write. I had about 3 dozen short stories that had sold, some for professional rates, some with some of the biggest names in the business. So at that time, there was a bulletin board online called Shock Lines, which was a meeting place for all horror professionals in the literature world. And anyone could get in. There was no gatekeeping, but in order to kind of swim with the fishes and understand what the hell was going on, you had to kind of be somewhat involved. So there wasn't a lot of like just readers that would show up. And a lot of people use screen names, so you wouldn't necessarily know, you know, that you were talking to Gary Brandner, right? And there was always kind of calls for submissions from publishers, especially small press publishers, on the boards. And I didn't have a novel to sell. But there was this Canadian publisher called Coscom Entertainment, run by A.P. Fuchs, and he put up this post that he was looking for traditional monster novels and novellas. And if you know me, like, traditional monsters are not where my head's usually at ever. And it was up for like a month before the deadline, and all he wanted was a query. He was not asking for me to send the manuscript. He just wanted a query in the form of an email. So about, I don't know, 11:30 on the night before the deadline was going to close, I was up, and I was probably a little punch drunk because I don't drink, but I was probably punch drunk from being up too late a couple nights in a row. And I said, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to just write a query, because what's the worst that could happen? He'll ask for a sample chapter. I got 3 samples. I can bang that out, send it to him in a couple days. We're good. So I came up with this concept of a truck driver on an overnight haul who hits a werewolf, and the pact come after him, and it's a chase novel. That's all I had, right? But nice. I put it in a query form, and I write a very professional query letter for this thing that doesn't exist, and I send it to him. And the next morning, I get up, and there's an email back saying, "I love this. Send the whole manuscript."
That's awesome.
So, which would have been awesome if it existed, right?
Well, yeah, I guess at that moment.
So it's not a hard fast rule, but on the level that I have always been on, you kind of have to have the thing done before you sell it. Like, well-established writers can get away with saying, "I have this idea, I'll have it for you in 6 months," but I can't get away with that. So I turned to everyone in my life and said, "You're not going to see me for a few days." And if I wasn't at work, I was writing, and I wrote straight through. And it's a novella. It's not a proper novel. It was published as a novel for marketing reasons, but it's a novella. It's a short novel. And I sent it in, and it was written so fast, and it was almost purely a first draft. I did 1 gloss before I sent it in, to the point where a character's name actually changed during the from scene to scene, back and forth. It was Russ, it was Ross, it was Russ, it was Ross. But still, there was like a certain kineticism because I'd written it so quickly and like so narrow-mindedly. So AP Fuchs got back to me and says, I love this. I want to offer you a contract, but there's a thing. I need a different ending to this thing. The ending was too abrupt, he felt, and not climatic enough. And rereading it, he was 100% right. But it was the first time that I realized really it was a business, right? I had to get my head around the fact that it was much more of a business than I ever thought. So I wrote a new ending, and I was extremely happy with the new ending. The new ending, like, completely worked better for the project. And I got to develop that myself. There was no notes, right? And I sent it in, and we went through the editing process. It came out, and an amazing thing happened, which is that for a small press book, it did pretty well. And it was the first book in the traditional monster line from Coscom. He needed something to come out and do well, and it did. And that was how Snarl came to be, and also got me a 3-book deal with Coscom out of that. So.
Which kind of leads into the next question. Cliff, you do have a question out there. I won't forget it, but I do want to finish this section up of this this series. So the next one, was that Lifeless?
It is Lifeless.
Okay. Wanted to see if I was on track, because I've read things in research saying like book 1, 2, and 3, and they seemed out of order.
Well, they're not chronological. That's for damn sure. So Lifeless came about because Snarl's numbers were doing well for a small press book, period, let alone the beginning of a line. And at that time, Brian Keene's The Rising was just opening up the horror market to kind of a pop fiction horror, because that's a zombie novel. If you don't know Brian Keene's The Rising, it was a really, really popular zombie novel that opened up the idea of like doing zombies and you know, slashers and that kind of stuff in a literary form. It was taken like a lot more seriously than it ever had been before. And so The Rising opened up, Borders started their horror section, became all zombie for like 3 years. You know, Permuted Press was a label that literally just went, all they were doing for like 5 years was zombie novels, because there was a market for it. So AP Fuchs called me and said, you know, this is doing really well. Something zombie from you would do really well for me. I just need just give me a pitch, and I think we can make a deal on this. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, if you could make it a 3-book deal with Snarl being the first of those 3, because I really wanted to do something that wasn't, you know, that was a little bit offbeat, I knew, for the 3rd book. And I knew I wanted to guarantee there. He said, well, just pitch it to me. And no one ever believes this part of the story, but it's absolutely true. I had a television on during this phone call, and the Breakfast Club was on a channel. But here's the thing. I was flipping through the channels. I wasn't stopping. And I just stopped because the phone call came in. And so Breakfast Club was on. I flipped the channel, and I shit you not, I don't know why, I don't know how, but Dawn of the Dead was on the next channel.
Okay, that's what I was expecting when you said Breakfast Club, to say something like Night of the Living Dead or
right. And so I literally just blurted into the phone, it's Breakfast Club meets Dawn of the Dead. It's high school kids in that barricade themselves in the library surrounded by their undead classmates. That was the pitch that came out of me.
Yes.
It was not prepared. It was completely accidental. And he just said, we're done. You have the deal.
Awesome.
So then I had to write that thing, though. So I never wanted to write a zombie novel. To me, I think that's well-trod ground, and I think it works better in film than necessarily in literature. But I gave myself 5 months to write it. I wrote it pretty much. There was a lot of drafting as I went along, so it's not like it was first draft like Snarl was, but there wasn't much change from my original mental outline to what was on the page at all. There rarely is, but in these early days there was a lot more of it. And so I wrote it. I turned it in. The editing on that went really, really smooth, and we actually got that book out by late November of 2009 after Snarl had come out in February of 2009. So there was my first 2 books came out the same calendar year.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
And not common, right?
No, it's not uncommon for like an established writer to be able to put out 2 books in a year, but not for someone at my level at that time now.
Awesome.
And so to go the obvious, finish up the trip.
You knew where I was going next, so just continue on.
Yeah, so
Eternal Unrest.
Eternal Unrest was what book I actually wanted to write. I've always felt that the mummy mythology is so rich, but it exists pretty much in film. There's Bram Stoker has a novel. There's Anne Rice did her like kind of romantic mummy take, but there isn't really a rich history of mummies in literature, and there certainly wasn't what I wanted to do, which was kind of this, more of a grindhouse take on the mummy, but with a big historical canvas. I wanted to do a World War II set mummy novel, and I want to do something big and ambitious and something that I could get my passion behind. Because as much as I think Snarl is a fun read, and I think Lifeless it seems to be one that I'm still talking about with people. They tend to mention that as a favorite. It's my least favorite of my novels, but that's okay. They love it, so that's good. I wanted to do something more for me, but still work within the traditional monsters, because that's what the line was. So Eternal Unrest took a lot longer to write because it's a much more involved novel, way more ambitious. Comes out in 2011, I think in March of 2011. And unfortunately, the publisher at that time was pretty much getting ready to close. So there was no promotion behind it. And I was unaware of that. So I'd built into the text a lot of subtle connections with both Lifeless and Snarl. And it was in pretty not subtly intended to eventually cross over and kind of into a big monster mash kind of novel, which I thought was going to be a lot of dumb fun. But the publisher was gone. He was not interested in going forward as a publisher. Eternal Unrest wasn't the last thing he published, but it was probably in the last 4 novels that came out from Coscom, and as a traditional publisher anyway. There was a couple of things that came out later that were not what a traditional publisher does. I'll just say that. And so the book kind of got lost. Like, the one I cared about got the least promotion and did the least well of the 3. And unfortunately, in the business, much like in music, you're only as good as the last album's sales, right? So I had to do a lot of rebuilding after that.
Well, and now it's got a second run on publishing recently, correct?
Yes.
All 3 of these novels we just talked about. So, and I haven't had a chance to check them out, but I'm excited to now after reading several of your books already.
The cool thing about those books is that they're random access. Like, they're self-contained stories. There's connections between them, but you can start wherever you want. You can finish wherever you want. It doesn't matter.
Okay. That's good to know.
Chronologically, it would be Eternal Unrest, Snarl, then Lifeless, but there's no reason to read them in that order necessarily.
Okay. Good to know. And all right, we'll get up to Cliff's question before it does get too far into the chat. Lawrence, top 3 or 5 giallos?
Oh, this could change every day of my life, but House with Laughing Windows, All the Colors of the Night,
Dan says similar to the...
Yeah. For the third one, let's today go with your Vice is a locked room and only I have the key. So there's 2 Martinos in there. I'm a huge Martino fan. I actually think that Martino was probably the better filmmaker of the Fulci, Argento, Martino argument. It's just he never had that that push from the establishment horror press. And yeah, he has crap too, but I would say even his crap is absurdly fun and interesting.
Excellent. And howdy, Ben. Thanks for joining us. And of course,
Mr. Graham.
good friend, Steak Sauce. Shout out.
The friend.
Well, I use it loosely. We're live,
All right.
I don't want to get slapped here. Anyway, now we did touch on it already, but I've got to say personally, this was the first thing I bought from you, the short stories, Visited by Voices Volume 1. And I love this. I still love it. I know it's not one of your big promotional ones, but continuity is one of my favorite stories out of it, and I love them all. It's tied with Blue Eel in sort of a way.
And eventually you'll understand how they work together. Because right now they seem to contradict each other, but you'll understand eventually.
Okay. Oh, that gets me excited.
Yeah.
That gets me really excited. Well, that brings us to then, I think next, I hope I'm not missing something in the list, but Blue Eel, which after reading the short stories, I was like, okay, now I'm ready to buy one of your full novels. And I loved it too.
Yeah, so Blue Eel was that story in its original form probably goes back 30 years for me. At least it goes back to the Jean Benet disappearance and murder, right?
That's a long time.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not very interested in the case at all. But what I am interested in is the fact that the entire country decided they all had pet theories about what must have happened. And I just tried to put myself in the position of imagine you're the father in a situation like that. And the whole world has made up all these decisions about you, and none of them were there. So what must that world live like? What kind of that isolation must feel like? And that's where the story began. I was like, I wanted to do something big and brash and kind of Lovecraftian at times, but more of like a revenge road novel. And I wanted to explore like the idea again of not going back to that scene. You don't get the disappearance of the daughter sequence. It's never on screen. But I was also very aware that as cool as the challenge of writing a book about a scene you don't get is, it'd be very easy for it to be very unsatisfying. So there had to be a resolution. So
it was satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, because unfortunately those really vague endings that sometimes you get in books, it can kind of destroy the experience. But I wanted there to be two groups of people as readers: those who thought that this whole thing was a delusional mind trip and that our main character Branson is dead guilty. And,
I had moments throughout reading it until that you feel that way.
And then another group of readers would be thinking he's on this righteous journey to retrieve or avenge his daughter. And
as a parent, I felt that too.
Right. And I wanted it to be a little frustrating that you weren't getting the scene to give you a concrete place to stand. But I wanted that to be like the drive of the book, is that not only are we on this journey with him, we're also looking at him the whole time and trying to figure out like what's there. And it was probably the easiest book to sell, but it was also the most frustrating journey to print. I sold it to Dark Continents, which if you look at the spine of that book, it does not say Dark Continents on it. It says Cutting Block Press or Cutting Block Books. So what happened is that publisher bought it, edited it, and then went out of business. So Dark Continents released it back to me, and I was so deflated. You have to understand that process was like a year and 2 months of it sitting with that publisher. And it was a book that took me almost 2 years to write too, which, considering how quickly I can write these things, that was a long time to be because it's a very careful narrative. And then an editor that I dealt with on the Cutting Block Books horror library series had contacted me and said, "Hey, what's happening with that book that we talked about forever ago?" And I'm like, "Dude, it was sitting at Dark Continents." He's like, "Oh, they just went out of business." I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Hey, don't worry about it. Let me shop it for you." And I said, "Well, I can't. I just like an agent situation. Are you going to take a cut? What are we talking about?" And he's like, "No. Let's just let me see." And he came back with 2 names that were interested like a week later.
All right.
And I was like, okay. And he's like, which one of these do you want me to pursue? And one of them was Cutting Block, who he's worked with before. And it was under new ownership. And they had not released a book yet. So once again, I'm leading line, right? And it gets to them. And I think we both assumed he'd be hired to edit the book. That did not happen. And the editor who came in didn't really understand the book. I was constantly fighting. He was constantly pushing me to try and be explicit about all the characters' motivations. And the whole point of the book was not to be explicit about their motivations. That this discovery of what the story is the story. And it's kind of hard to explain that when someone's knee deep in like line editing. So there was a lot of battles. There's an entire chapter of the book that resolves the an entire character's arc that he just wanted gone. This chapter does nothing for me. It doesn't push the story forward. I'm like, the book opens with this character being, abducted basically, and you don't want to have a resolution to this character. So it was a painful edit, definitely. The book comes out the other side being a very clean read. It's not exactly what I originally wrote.
Well, it's good. And I'd like to add more of myself, say something profound about it, but I know I'm just going to screw it up. But I loved it. It's horror, but it's got so many different genres within it. I could list off, as Daniel Shine says, it's Blue Eel is awesome.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
I'm so proud of the book. Don't get me wrong. It's just, it was a very painful edit. And I had to fight for every inch of that book. And I lost some battles too. I think there's some scenes that if they were reinstalled in the book would shock people about what was there at different points. The Abriella character, who is a fan favorite, like every time I get contacted about that book, that's the character that people latch. There was a lot more Abriella. She got sacrificed to the gods of editing more than any other character, that's for sure.
Which definitely happens.
Yeah.
Hello, Corey from S'mores and Doors. Thank you for joining us. And Jake from Slaughterport.
Slaughterport, horrible taste in movies, but I love you, man.
Ooh. And one last note on Blue Eel before we move along. Dan's got his signed hardcover sitting between Pressure.
One of my favorite novels of all time is Pressure.
Bottled Abyss. Very cool. I got to get mine signed yet, but we have to meet.
Yeah. I will say that hardcover you can confirm is out of print. All the copies that were pressed of it are pretty much accounted for. I have a few on Etsy that are for sale for a very reasonable price. But there is one on eBay, not from me, that's at a really unreasonable price. So go for that one.
Dan's going to be hawking his copy here. Or is that Dan's on eBay?
That is Dan's on eBay, yeah. I will say that the book is currently available in paperback for the cover price. You don't have to spend a lot if you just want to read the book, and it is available as an ebook. All these are available as ebooks. You don't have to go broke for me. That's for sure.
If that's what it takes you to read this, do it. But I mean, it's definitely worth the paperback. It's awesome to have. I
love nothing more than a beaten up paperback. That's my whole world,
man. Me too.
On that note, Lorne, what do you think is the future for print media?
I don't think we know. So 20 years ago, you get together with writers and they were fearful of the future because digital was such a scary world, right? For a lot of reasons. POD was taking over traditional print, and that was allowing a lot of independent presses that were one-man shows coming in there, barely editing things, putting them on the market. And then self-publishing came along, and that scared people because a lot of readers were getting burnt on books that were not ready for prime time yet. Not to say they would never have been, but they needed the traditional process to turn them into what they could be. And then again, ebooks scared people because we all watched what happened with the music industry, right?
Right.
And yes. How would piracy affect? I'm a guy who, if you do a Google search for like 100 zombie novels, you'll find a torrent that has Lifeless in it. I mean, and it'll be one of the top results too. It's not like hidden, and it's been up for years. So yeah, I mean, piracy was something we were all very frightened of, but it has turned out to be a very minor player. And I think that's because the passion for people who are reading at this point is stronger than people's passion for just kind of the more passive art forms like music and movies. It's not saying people aren't passionate about them, but they're fully willing to say, I don't care about the people who made this. I just want the thing. Whereas there seems to be more of a connection with writers and their audience. But as for the future, I think books will be around, and I think physical books will be around. I think ebooks aren't going anywhere. They're always going to be part of the equation. I think part of the democracy of publishing is going to scale back, though. I think that less people will self-publish in the future, simply because no one's making real big money with self-publishing unless you are already established as a traditional writer in a traditional publishing sense. So I think things are going to go back a little bit towards normal, but what normal is at that point, listen, we're to the point where as people own like physical, 3D printers in their house and are making sporks with every meal. I don't pretend to understand what a book looks like in 20 years. It might be completely unrecognizable. So
it's true. Very true. Well, I hope it still somewhat resembles the books we know.
I hope so. I like the tangible aspect of it. It's something about turning pages that I just don't get the same experience on an ebook,
Exactly.
I don't own a Kindle. And I guess when I talk to new publishers and even other peers, they're always shocked by that because they think there's something like to be gained by just being on the cutting edge, but it's not the cutting edge anymore. Again, 15 years ago it was the cutting edge. Now it's a niche, really. But yeah, no, to me, I used to keep every book that I ever read, right, forever, and then I moved a few times and I discovered I didn't need to do that anymore because books are heavy. But it created something really cool for me, which is that if I liked the book but didn't love it, I passed it on to someone, and then I'd get to have a conversation with them about that book eventually. And that was like, there's such value to that, knowing that if they loved it and we're going to revisit it 90 times in their life, they'd keep it, but more likely they were going to pass it on too. And there's something beautiful about that, right?
There is.
Yeah, the idea that this kind of this interconnected world of experience. And I think that's really cool. I think that's really valuable.
Except Corey asked me for one of your books to read, and I wouldn't give it to him. I told him to go buy one. And he did. He did.
Well, I appreciate you looking out for it.
I have to, we got to support, which is worth it. It's more than just supporting, because I mean that's kind of what I did at first with Visited by Voices. I thought, well, no, I know it's not much, but I'm going to give them a little support, and if I like it, I might buy something. And man, I really liked it, or I wouldn't now have several of your books, and will continue to buy. Bleak December, would you say is that next on our list?
It is. And
is this your most recent published novel?
Until October, yes.
Okay, we'll get to that. But let's talk Bleak December then.
Bleak December is another challenging publishing story. I knew when I was writing it that it was going to be a little bit challenging to convince Cutting Block to publish it. I had a 3-book deal with them. They'd signed me for 3 books, of which, Blue Whale was the first. And Bleak it's a book about Alzheimer's and dementia.
Which I have a note when I'm reading it, and this is, I think you're supposed to. I almost felt like I had dementia at moments reading it, in a good way.
So, I mean, not to get
if you can say that.
So
sorry, Jay.
I don't believe in doing endless research, but I did research the stages of Alzheimer's, and the book actually uses them as touchstones in how the narrative is presented. But for instance, one major turning stone during the whole dementia process is when you stop being able to communicate with family. And there's a point in the book where that literally becomes a plot point. But anyway, I knew it was going to be a little bit tough because it's a harder book. And it could be misinterpreted as being a straight exploitation book because there's some hard stuff in it. It's not extreme horror. It's not splatterpunk, but there's some specific scenes that go really dark places. And I mean, the book does open at a concentration camp during World War II.
Wow.
And that's not even the darkest place it goes. I would argue that there's a key scene in the book, which is a memory, and it's not a trustable memory, which is something I like, but it's a brutal murder sequence. But the problem with that is it's not a murder sequence committed by a villain. So how you feel about that scene is a big mixture of, it should be anyway. I mean, I don't know.
It is.
I can't guess how a reader reads, but it's meant to be a very challenging scene because you kind of reassess a character during the reading of this incredibly brutal scene. And I did some things to prepare for that scene that I'm not proud of. I mean, the internet is full of places you can watch horrific real life violence. And I'm not a supporter of that. I have no stomach for it. I love the fake stuff, but you put the real stuff in front of me, I just walk away. I don't want a part of that. I was never that guy in the video store who wanted to rent Faces of Death. I know we know it's fake now, but I didn't know that as a kid. And I went, no.
Same here. And that was one movie I could never finish.
Absolutely not.
Similar.
But I decided one thing I knew about, because unfortunately in my real life I have I've seen and experienced some pretty brutal things, and I realized that how violence and particularly death is presented in fiction, all types of fiction, is grossly inaccurate. There's a weird real violence isn't alien. It's not stylized. It's not glorious. It's actually kind of plain, and it has a stillness to it. Even when extremely violent things are happening, it doesn't feel like it's not a part of our world. And I think we place mentally it in this place that should be not accessible, right? But when you watch these real life videos, part of the problem is you're not as disturbed by it as you should be. Mm-hmm. And it creates a kind of mental confusion. And I remember I just said, I'm going to load up and I'm going to watch as much of this stuff as I can, and then I'm immediately going to write. I'm going to put myself in the darkest mind space I can do to write this scene. And I remember feeling very numb, very cold, like cold to the touch. And writing was a very weird experience because I knew I didn't want to go back and edit it a lot because you didn't want to lose a lot. But it put me in a really, really, really dark place. And the scene, I think, works because of that. I would never do it again. Never.
I don't blame you.
I don't need to pollute my mind more than I mean, I already have depression. I really don't need to do this to myself again. So.
Well, getting back more on the positive note of it, RetroCac says it is a must read.
It is my favorite of my novels.
Oh, cool.
Of the published novels.
And another fun note about it, it takes place in December, and every chapter is a day in December. So chapter 1 is December 1st, and it goes on till the end of the book that way. And that's pretty cool.
It was intended to be read like an advent calendar. So that the idea is you start in December and you read a chapter a day and it would take you on that journey. Ultimately, when I submitted the novel to Cutting Block, they kind of did what I expected. I was away at work with my team working, and I got a phone call at dinner while I was with my team telling me they were not publishing this book. And not a complete surprise. But now I found myself without a home for the book. And a really remarkable thing happened, which is that a couple guys, and in the beginning, a couple guys and a girl, then it became just a couple guys, said, "Hey, we were trying to do a micro press, and we're fans of yours. We'd love to do this." And it was cool because it gave me more of a control of the creative process than I'd had before too. Like in the past, I'd have to fight my battles for scenes, whereas they were always like, "It doesn't quite work for us. Can we work on it? But we want to keep what you wanted to do." There was always a sensitivity to let me keep what I wanted to do. And the editing of the book is still edited like as professionally as anything on the market. But it allowed me to be more personal with the book. And then the greatest thing was that, they, after the book came out and did well, they made a little bit of money. I made a little bit of money. Then they turned the book over to me. They were like, "We're good. We wanted to do this. This was an experience we wanted in our life. We're probably not going to publish more books, but here you go."
Wow.
And so it was a really good experience. And incidentally, Bleak December sold more copies than Blue Eel from a micropress. So that teaches you something maybe about that question about the future of the industry too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does give you a little hint. They're both fantastic to me. That's all I can say.
Thank you. I think they're both ambitious books for the horror genre, and that's what I'm proud of. If you guys know me more as the guy who talks about dumb movies, right? So I'm always impressed when someone wants to do something that hasn't been done before. So I tried to live that mantra in my work of this: don't be lazy. Don't just repeat. Try and take people to places they haven't been before. So hopefully that it has all worked. I don't know.
I was just going to say, I think you accomplish all of that. I really do. And we did have a few more people join in. Orc, Big Crack Rock, hello. And Griffin joined us, and he has a question. But first, I think Jay might have a question for you. Do you still?
Yeah, I wanted to check. Is any of your work available on Audible?
Right now, no. However, the publisher, Fractured Mirror Press, of the upcoming novel Divide by Zero, coming out in October, do intend to have an audiobook version.
Awesome.
That will be my first audiobook. Part of the reason that's always been a problem with me is that I don't like the sound of my own voice. I know that surprises everyone. But I don't think I'd ever want to read my own work aloud. And believe it or not, that's really what the publishers want. They don't want.
That's what I want.
That's not what I want. So, I don't know who will read that Divide by Zero, but it won't be me.
Well, looking forward to reading it or listening to it in the future.
Appreciate
Well,
it.
again, since you brought that up, before I get to Griffin's question, let's talk about as much as you can. Obviously, you can't give too much away about upcoming.
Yeah.
But
so Divide by Zero, it's a cross-genre novel, as all my work kind of is, except for the monster books. In this case, it's a combination of the heist novel and a cosmic horror novel, not necessarily Lovecraftian, but more along the lines of, I'd say, William Hope Hobson. House by the Borderlands was a big influence on this book. But yeah, so the idea was to frame a cosmic horror story inside a kind of Ocean's 11 type of heist, well within the weird fiction tradition. Divide by Zero is the name of a company that, as the name of the company suggests, take on impossible cases. Think the A-Team, except not going to solve the problem with an armored car. So the group is led by Kelsabeth Ryman, and she hires a group of criminals and technicians to go invade basically a cult to steal a religious artifact that no one knows what is. It has no reputation. It just is the cornerstone of this cult. So they go to infiltrate this cult and steal this artifact. And while there, they discover that something much, much, much bigger is happening. And I enjoyed it because it's cool because it allows me to flex some different muscles from a writing standpoint. It's a book that has a lot of characters, and it has a buildup and of intensity from the beginning to the end that's pretty much a straight line. And by the end, we're dealing with a lot of different types of storytelling. So that all have to come together simultaneously, and I think it was a cool challenge to me, because in the past I've been pretty I don't know, direct about the storytelling, and this has a lot more. I don't want to say too much, but it has a lot more going on at the same time, and so there's a lot of balancing that the reader is going to need to do, in a good way. I don't think it's going to be a confusing book at all. I think everyone who's read it at this point completely gets where it's going.
We will all be looking forward to that.
Hopefully October. That's what we're shooting for right now. The good folks over at good folks over at Fractured Mirror Press, they are taking a big chance on this because they are more of a science fiction and fantasy publisher. This is going to be their first foray into horror, which seems to be a recurring theme in my publishing career, is starting lines. So here we go again. I love their books. I think that they put out really, really handsome editions. And right now it appears that definitely will be paperback and audio as well as ebook. It's a possibility of another hardcover. We'll see. I don't know, but it looks like that's a possibility too.
Cool. Well, let's get to Griffin's question before I forget about it. And I do like this one. If Lorne got to choose a movie director to bring one of his stories to Hollywood, who would he personally pick?
It would depend on the book. I mean, I guess that's kind of the obvious answer, right? I think if the monster stories came to the screen, I would want someone. I'd want a just exploitation director, someone who goes out there and makes a film for a wage, because I think those books work on that level. For Blue Eel or Bleak December, or definitely Divide by Zero, need someone with some kind of a sense of the uncanny. Someone who can pull off those moments of unease and that feeling that you're not quite in reality. I guess someone like a Mike Flanagan, maybe.
Right.
And that might be pie in the sky stuff, because he's obviously probably the biggest name in horror right now that's currently making films in the genre. But
hello, Ghost. Well, finishing up on the books, just real quick, had to bring up, you did a publishing, this is actually not your work, of Bram Stoker's Dracula, right? You
did.
How would you put that? Is that like a...
So Dracula's in the public domain, and I was talking to just a member of the community, we'll say, I don't know if they want to be identified, who was asking if there was a good, like, definitive version of Dracula on the market that they could just buy from Amazon. Like, what's the best guy? And I was like, I don't know. I've owned like 10 copies of Dracula in my life, but I don't have a single copy that I'd say is like the way to go. But then I did a weird thing, is I went out there and researched it, because I get like fixated on ideas, and I realized there's like every edition of Dracula out there looks like shit. They either make it look like a stodgy historical novel, or it looks like some death metal band are putting it out. There was it never looked like a modern horror novel to me when I saw it, and I felt that really is what the novel deserved. It deserved to be taken seriously by modern readers, but look good, right?
Yes.
So I just decided, like, to take it on. Like, can I do this thing? Can I put out a version of Dracula that would satisfy what I would want Dracula to look like? And again, it's in the public domain, so there was no rights problem. What I didn't realize is that although it's in the public domain, there are 3 distinct versions of the text that exist from 3 different incarnations of the novel. So I had to really try and bring all 3 together to keep as much as I could and put it in some way that would be satisfying It was also a matter of like contacting an artist to create the cover, and a lot of work that I'd never taken on before. I was completely out of my depth, but I think we pulled it off, and I think it's a handsome book. I think it's a great addition. I think it's I will say this, that at least one horror scholar that people know the name of did come back and say, "Hey, you did a lot of hard work here that I'm shocked that no one has done," and that made me pretty happy.
Nice, yeah.
That said, I mean, it initially sold okay, and then it just stopped because the problem is every day of the week, year round, someone's putting Dracula out, so it's hard to stay on the front page of Amazon, you know.
That's still very cool, and any of you are Dracula fans, definitely try to pick that one up.
Yeah, I'm still interested in trying to like get other public domain titles out there. It's just between work and my own like day job and this and trying to run the channel, there's just not a lot of time to do it right now. When I get another break in my life, maybe we'll take on Shelley's Frankenstein or another public domain work. I'd love to take on Stevenson. That'd be really cool because I think, again, that's a book that every time you look at it, it looks like a Penguin classic with some like, you know, I don't know, Renaissance painting on the cover, and it's like, what the hell are they doing?
And Ben Grimm, no.
Listen, here's the thing. Rob Zombie or Jason Blum, you guys want to write me a check? I'm completely cool. I'll stay out of your way.
Okay.
Good with it.
But no. Orc does have a question, but we'll move along to this, and then I'll try to catch that at the end, Orc. Since we brought up doing the YouTube, that's where we're at now on my list of questions. Lorne, you were on Region Free. You join us on a lot of different channels in the community and different shows. But you run Visited by Voices1. This is your YouTube channel. Let's talk about that. You've got a variety on your channel as well. It's not just one show or the same thing. You've got Visited by Voices Live. You've got Duel, The Obscurity Report, Storytelling Autopsies. How did that start up? Just in the last couple of years, right?
Yeah. So I had done some writing for Friday 13th, the franchise.com for Jason Parker, who runs the site. And he's a really interesting guy. He's a huge fan, but he's not exactly what people would think. He's not just a Friday 13th fan. He loves horror. He loves video games. He loves all kinds of things. And there was a point where on the Sausage Factory, we're doing an episode about as a fundraiser for Camp Novi Scoba. And Jason had reached out and said, "Hey, you should watch this. I'm going to be on it." So I watched the episode, and I was in the chat because, you know, if you put a bar for me to type in front of me, it's like there's no chance I'm not going to do it. And so I was just kind of making comments along the way, and Piz at one point said, "We got someone new in the chat," and Jason was like, "Oh yeah, no, that's Lorne. He's written for my site." And Piz reached out to me afterwards and said, "Hey, you know, you should come on the show at some time." And I was like, "Me on camera? You out of your mind? It's a bad idea."
Thank God he did.
And but I was away for work. They had me on 3 months away from home, and you know, you said that puts you in a different mindset. And I went on and talked to the guys, and I guess things went okay. For a while there, I was the heel of the show, I think. Might still be. I'm not sure. But it was a long time before I started Visited by Voices. Although the title Visited by Voices was already with me. It had been my email address since, like, I don't know, 99 or something ridiculous. So I just, at a certain point, I realized that as much as I love Sausage Factory wasn't my thing. And there's things I want to discuss that were just never going to be on the show. And no fault of the show, right? I mean, if we're going to talk about, you know, mid-century Gothic romance novels, then that's not going to show up on Sausage
Not
Factory.
the Sausage Factory, which is not region free, for those who don't know.
Right. And So I felt like there was an opening for me, but I started in very safe places with stuff that would hopefully attract that audience. But then I realized that I really wasn't that interested in talking about Friday the 13th and Halloween every day of my life. Love those films, but I think everything that can be said about the big franchises pretty much has. So I said,
Well,
you know
if
what?
people want that, you still have those on your channels too.
Yeah, they're still there. There's just what I realized though is that that's not really as core to me as it is to other people in the community. And so I took a big roll of the die and said, you know what, I'm going to cover other shit, and I'm going to start calling up people I know in the publishing game and bring on writers of including some really big names in the horror genre that I know, and I'm going to bring them on. And then I contact people I didn't know because those shows did pretty well. And I also was able to like say, okay, if we are going to talk about Candyman, can we talk about what the movie's actually about and how the narrative works, rather than talking about, hey, isn't Tony Todd's voice really sexy? And so it's let me do kind of what interests me. Now, that's not to say that I think there's anything wrong with anyone else's take, but I'm just not I'm going to do a ranking of the top 40 kills in a Nightmare on Elm Street series. It's just not me, right? And to force myself to do any of that stuff is not something I'm going to do. I'm not chasing clicks. I'm not chasing subscriptions. I'd love the channel to grow. I love the channel has grown. But hopefully the people, when they click the link and they see, the first interview with Gary Bronbeck in 7 years, hopefully that's an experience that you can't get anywhere else, and hopefully it's meaningful for them, right? Having Ramsey Campbell on the channel, having the writers roundtables where you have impossible situations. There's people who contact me all the time and say, you put these people together. Like, that's never happened before, that's important to me. It's not like the channel is just a literary channel either. I do still want to cover film. I want to cover what interests me. And
that's good.
I think that's the success, I think, for everyone, though, because no one can chase clicks forever and be passionate. At a certain point, you become something else. And I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with chasing that stuff, but I think personally, if you ask me what videos I want to watch on YouTube, it's always the people who are really passionate about what they're talking about, and you can tell.
Well, I think that's what's great for this, what we call a community of channels and shows, is that you're not clicking over on your page and getting the same exact shit as you're getting on my page or Region Free or Jay's, or we're all, doing something different.
Yeah,
but has a similar something that brings us together, but in a different point of view.
That's why people think that I'm like, I'm against talking about professional wrestling or not at all. It's not going to be for me, and I'm not going to watch hours of professional wrestling. But I like the fact that people are being brought together by what their experience, what brings them joy. And I think at the end of the day, I would rather people talk about the stuff that they care about, even if it's not my thing. It's also just a case too, whereas I looked out there and I saw that if you look at the big YouTube channels that cover the genre, I felt that they kind of all lump together and don't have quite as much personality. And I just said, I don't love the sound of my voice, but I have a voice, and that's kind of why the Visited by Voices name makes sense to me. It's because I think, Jess, you having this channel, you bring something. It's a viewpoint. It's a point of view. It's important. I'm proud that in some small way, if I let people know it was okay to just be themselves and have a channel, and we end up with steak sauce and Mike the Fifth Beetle, and who, if I'm in any small way responsible for letting people know it's okay to go out there and fall on your face a few times, because I certainly did. Well, man, there's nothing that makes me prouder.
Well, thank you, because you are a big part of that. Bringing up your community shows is one of the first, if not the first, that I jumped on and streamed was on YouTube on screen.
Yeah,
So thank you.
that was actually kind of a challenge that was put to me. At one point, I was talking to Cameron, and Cameron said to me, "Someday I just feel like I should just put the link in the chat and just let whatever happens happen." And it got into my head. And I said, "Well, is there a way to do that that wouldn't be a complete dumpster fire? Is there a way that could be?" And it was taking a big chance. You didn't know what was going to happen there. And a remarkable thing happened when I was doing those early community shows was that the amount of respectful conversation, the amount of genuine laughs, I think relationships formed on those shows. Not all of them worked out, but
Absolutely.
No, but absolutely.
real.
Yeah.
And then a greater thing happened because, to be honest with you, my channel is not the best host of that format. It's not. I'm always a guy who, how to put this, I'm not the guy who's going to be as flexible as other people. So the amazing thing that happened is that I feel like other channels took up that concept and just ran with it. And yeah, Piz had been doing the Patreon streams, which is a little bit different. But so I don't want to make it like I invented anything. I didn't. I robbed every bit of that concept. But I did it, and I think that other channels kind of ran with it, and I didn't need to be the place anymore. I can do them once in a while, and it's an event from the community, and that's cool. But I love the fact that it led to a lot more people doing it. And again, that's something I'm proud of. I don't want to overstate my importance in it, but I think those shows did kind of jumpstart something.
I think they definitely, it created new channels out of it, at least a few in the community that are now. Yeah, that we're all kind of tied together in some way.
And it's not about horror, which is I think the most interesting thing. It's just horror was the way we all shook hands.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And while I'm a horror guy, and it's going to be always hard for me to have a conversation for very long without it going back to the genre, it's really heartening to me that it's not just about one thing, because I got to tell you, like when a bunch of us did get together in Kentucky last year, there was remarkably little talk about horror or the genre. It was a bunch of friends got together that talked about fucking everything.
That's awesome.
And that was a great thing.
Yes.
My one regret is that we didn't all sit down with cameras and do something for the air. I mean, I have a little video that kind of us coming together and bowling, but which is wonderful in its own right because it's just bizarre. But I do wish that that people in the community got to see a little bit more of what happened there. And my hope that in the future we can do more events together and really bring the community even closer,
I would love that. And Dan was mentioning another get together is in order. So I'm hoping that
it is, but
comes to fruition.
it might get nuked before then. So
well,
yeah.
We'll see.
I can get my Mad Max Mohawk helmet on and get out there.
Oh, damn it, I lost Oric's question. I was going to go down in the chat. Give me a moment.
Yeah, it would be nice to find a central location where everyone doesn't have to drive so far, but I don't know if that's possible.
So
it might be more of a what's the most, I don't want to say cheapest flight, but to where everybody can
that was
get to a certain hub. That
was kind of my thought. I always thought that Orlando made a lot of sense simply because there's so many flights leading there that it's cheaper. But unfortunately, with where fuel is right now, I don't know that.
Those airline tickets are skyrocketing.
Are they starting to shoot up?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
No, they're not starting. They're there.
Yeah.
Well, they were still pretty cheap last I checked, which wasn't that long ago.
But I mean, I drove 10 hours last time, and yeah, I walked away with a book deal too. But so I did double duty there. But yeah, I would like to. I don't have a problem spending a day driving to get to a central location because you guys aren't coming to me, frankly, So, but it's tough. We are all over the country.
Yeah.
And frankly, all over the globe,
Yeah.
which the next thing, but that's probably a couple years down the line still.
Yeah. The world tour.
Well,
all right, Orc.
We're going to Prague. Everybody's going to Prague.
Pizza with any director, who would it be? Now, I've asked this before though at work. Do they have to be alive? Could they be directors from any time? I mean, do they have to be a director? Are we talking a filmmaker?
Those are good questions. And then what toppings? It's a whole bunch of different.
So I answer it different every single time. But if I'm going to answer it in the most unstable way possible, I really love my bacon as a topping for pizza. It's the king topping, definitely.
Oh, it's my son's.
Also with a lot of cracked black pepper on it as well. I'm a big fan. But probably Carl Laemmle Jr. The guy responsible for the modern American horror film in every single way. The guy who not only greenlit and produced, but like spearheaded Dracula, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Wolfman, right up through the late 50s. Yeah, that's the dude I want to sit down with, at least today.
How about
There's so
John
much.
Waters and goat cheese? How about that?
That's an interesting combo. Dr. CZ Death. Oh, I'm glad you brought that up because he really enjoys when you did the personal story with like your personal stories, like the candy bar story.
That story is
Love
100%
that.
real, by the way. There is
Love
absolutely nothing embellished about that story whatsoever, except for the name of the person that comes to the door, which I really don't know what her name was. I think they said it was Agnes or something, but I don't know. I don't. But that story is real. That candy bar is the real deal. Yeah, I'd like to do that stuff. I don't know if I can do animation all the time because it took me forever. But my shitty animation.
It was good though. It fit that. I mean, I was into it.
Yeah, look, I would love to do more of that kind of stuff. The problem really becomes that I don't have the confidence that everything that's ever happened in my life is that interesting. There's a couple stories I think people would dig. I have a story about a girl jumping off out of the window during science class that I think people will think is pretty funny. It wasn't for her that day, but there's stuff like that I could do. Or the day we crazy glued the psycho girl to the desk in I think that was math class. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. By the way, crazy glue doesn't easily come off when there's no way to get to the surface area.
Okay.
What was that?
I think that was over when you had we were talking about the community shows and you put the link in the stream. I think that happened on another person's channel. We just, and yes, Region Free does have a very cool opening credit sequence.
Which one? Courtesy of Lorne Dixon.
There is a brand new one now. They're actually both really cool.
It's funny because there's a lot of work that goes into them, but I can't really. If you were to see either of them without Christian Hannah Horror's music, they don't work nearly as well. So I mean, they're definitely collaborations. Also, all the clips everyone sent in. It's and the cool thing too about the Region Free guys is that there really isn't the ego problem. Like I come and say, hey, I need a clip of you doing this. They bring it. I mean, they are a group of creative people. Sometimes they need a push. Won't lie to you, but if I say to Jay, hey Jay, I need something alien from you, he's getting out the aluminum foil and he's making spaceships. It's amazing stuff.
Well, I hope I didn't miss anything that anybody wanted to ask Lorne in the chat. I don't know if you have anything you want to wrap up. I was basically going to ask you, Lorne, if there's anything that I missed in your career that you'd like to bring up or anything coming up you want to promote.
Really, my thing is very simple. I came to the community with kind of mercenary tendencies. Yes, I want to sell books, right? But I made a decision really early on that I wasn't going to do kind of the typical YouTube pandering. I didn't want to do the Patreons. I didn't want to ever have super chats. I didn't want to do a bunch of videos just to get my subscriber count up so I could monetize the channel. That was never like a concern of mine. My concern was I wanted people to get something from me being out there to the point whereas they'd be interested enough to say, okay, let's see what this guy does, what his passion really is, and buy the books because they believed in me or had just seen something in what I do that made them like inspired to buy, to support the books and support me. I didn't want it to be just the typical. I kind of hate, and this is not a riff on anyone, but I kind of hate when like a super chat comes up $10 because I said something. You know, it's like, really? I will sell you an entire book of words for $5 more than that. And that way you have something that you own, and if you hate it, you can sell it and make a few dollars back on it. So I just really want to say that, like, we have a community that has a lot to say, and there's a lot of great people. If you like what I do, come October, you know what to do. You know, I'm gonna pimp the book on the channel, but I promise that's not all I'll ever do. I've tried to really balance the amount of self-promotion with the amount of like content, and sometimes that's hard, you know. But hopefully people appreciate the fact that it's just not just. I'm not trying to fleece. I joke about fleecing people, but I'm not. Hopefully that comes through, and hopefully people respond. So yeah, I mean, that's Divide by Zero will be coming out this fall from Fractured Mirror Press. Follow them on Twitter. They have releases coming out all the time. Definitely boost their publications, because the bigger they are and the more resources they are, the more they can invest in me. So go on Twitter, just search for Fractured Mirror, and every time they post that they have something new coming out, just retweet the hell out of that. That's how you can help me, and that's worth more than a Patreon or any kind of donation you could ever give to me. Because really, at the end of the day, I would like to write for a living. That's a dream that will probably never come true for me. But I've been taking the run at it for the last 20 years or so, and I intend to continue to do it until I die, which probably is a week from Thursday, but I'm going to try right up to it.
Well, I hope you don't stop. Yeah, let's hope not. And I put as many of the links I could get down below. It's got links to the books that are available now, links to your channel. Please check those out if you haven't already. I know a lot of you in the chat are already signed up for that, but anybody else new viewing, please do. Please do. I don't think you'll be disappointed.
I appreciate that.
I appreciate you coming on, Lorne. Yes. No, and thank you, Jay.
You know, these are two of my favorite people right here. How could I ever say no?
Oh, brother, thank you.
I mean, you're not Christina Ricci or anything.
I don't know. I'll never be. And I understand. I can live with that.
Tapsy Panu or anything like that.
Well, thanks again for coming on, and thank you all for watching. We'll probably see you for another Jess Graham Live, I know, and other shows on this channel. So stay tuned, and good night.